All right, so this is a Google document that I have shared with you in Google Classroom. It is called, in Google Classroom, Lesson 4, Investigating How Water Moves Around the UAE. So since you couldn't be here to do the investigations in class, I am setting them up for you to do via video. So before you get started, you can see that each link links down to a separate section. Each of them goes to a different experiment. The first thing you do before you get started is you need to do this introduction and set a purpose for the investigations. Why are we doing these investigations? If you're struggling with how to answer that, I would suggest looking at the description of the task. You need to set this purpose because this is something that all scientists do before they do an investigation. They have a question that's their purpose, or they set, a statement of purpose. What are they trying to find out? All right, this is station 1, the stream table. And in this station, you're investigating runoff, which is water that runs off the land. So as you can see, it's all set up. Here's some land. It's set up on a slope. So it's like a hill, and our water is gonna come out of here. And so if you look at the table, in the investigation document, that you can see that you're gonna look at first a quarter cup, a half a cup, and a whole cup, and 3/4 of a cup to see what happens. And as you can see, water is running down here, okay, down this hill, and you can see a whole bunch of this sand has been carried downhill by the water. Now we're gonna try half of a cup. And again, you can see even more water is running down. It's carrying rocks with it, and it's pouring into this basin down here. Think of this like a reservoir. So you can kind of see this in the video when we talk, in the Naz Daily video at the beginning of the unit where he visited Hatta Dam. It's surrounded by mountains. So water can travel down those mountains and end up collecting in the dam. And then finally, 3/4 of a cup. You can see that there's way more water. It's traveling faster. It's carrying more sediments. Okay. So you can see in the investigation, you should have written observations for each one of those things. You can take a screenshot or draw a picture of the stream table, and then there are 2 reflection questions to answer. All right, now we are at station number 2 about soil percolation. So you're gonna be observing how water gets underground into the groundwater so that companies like Masafi can pull the fresh water up out of the ground. You're gonna compare how different earth materials affect water infiltrating or entering or percolating into the earth. So you can see that we've got 4 different types of sediments here. We've got soil, sand, clay, and rocks. And we're gonna pour 100 milliliters of water in each one and then wait 5 minutes. And you're gonna record observations of what happens and how many milliliters of water that percolate through. And then once you do that, there will be 3 reflection questions. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so this will take a minute because I've gotta pour out the water. All right, so that's 100 milliliters into the soil. We can see that it's already dripping through. And then we've got 100 milliliters into the sand, and it looks like it's just kind of sitting on top. It's not percolating through. And we've got 100 milliliters into the clay, and it's a lot like the sand. No water is traveling through. All right, we got 100 milliliters. pouring it into the rocks. And look at that, it's going through pretty quickly. So we're gonna wait 5 minutes and see what happens. All right, it's been 5 minutes. And if we look at the soil, it looks like 125 milliliters have traveled through and some is still dripping through. Now we only put in 100, so there must have been some extra water stored in the soil from an earlier experiment. Here is the sand. It's only at about 25 milliliters traveled through. You can still see there's some water sitting on top. The clay has a whole bunch of water sitting on top. And in fact, it looks like no water has gone through. Maybe a little, maybe half a milliliter, right? And then here's the rocks. Some still dripping, but we've got about maybe 85 milliliters or 90 milliliters of water has traveled through. Okay, so you wanna make sure you've got some general observations and that you've recorded the milliliters of water in the table, and then answer the 3 reflection questions. Okay, activity 3 is about evaporation. You're gonna use a gizmo to observe the process of evaporation. You should have an account. If you don't, I will give you information about how to create one. But you'll log into the website and you'll go to the phase changes gizmo. You might have to scroll down to find it. They're organized by topic, and so it would be under the thermal energy topic. And in the gizmo, you change the setting to micro view and then add heat. I can show you what this would look like. So if I log in to a class, here's the phase changes one under heat transfer. I launch it. And I change it to micro view so I can see the molecules. And then I'm gonna add heat energy and I'm gonna watch and see what happens. Okay, so you can see that the temperature is going up. You can watch and see if the molecule's behavior changes. You can watch and see if anything happens to the amount of water. Right now it seems like the amount of water is staying the same, but the molecules do look like they're speeding up. But look, now that it's at 100 degrees Celsius, the amount of water is decreasing. So some of the water is evaporating or vaporizing as it boils. All right, and if you watch, we just saw a molecule escape. So you wanna write those observations, talk about what happens to the amount of water, what happens to the water molecules, and then what is the temperature where we saw the water start boiling. Then you're gonna read and highlight some important information in these 2 paragraphs and answer these 3 reflection questions. Okay, now on to investigation 4. All right, in investigation 4, we're looking at condensation. You're going to see an example of condensation in this video. So let's watch that.
Oh, what? Oh my God, I can't see. My glasses are all fogged up. Oh, they're so wet.
So there's an example of condensation in the UAE. And you're gonna do this experiment. Here's the experiment. The electric kettle is filled. We're gonna record observations of what's happening in the kettle while the water is boiling. And then we're gonna hold a beaker over the kettle and wait to see what happens and record observations. That would go what's going on in the glass here. Okay, and then you can again take a photo. So if we put it up here, we can boil and see what happens. And if you look at the labels, we can see that the kettle is labeled evaporation, because we're gonna see evaporation happening in the kettle. And then the beaker is labeled condensation, because we're gonna see condensation happening in the beaker. So now we're just gonna have to wait. All right, it's been about 1.5 minutes and the water is starting to boil. So that means we've got water evaporating or vaporizing. It's turning from a liquid into a gas. I can even, you probably can't see very well. Maybe you can see it a little, some of that steam coming out. Now, if I put this up here, look at what happens. It's getting all steamed up. But if we look, what we can actually see inside the beaker is that there are water droplets. So the gas that was coming out of the kettle is turning back into, is cooling down in the beaker and turning back into liquid water. Okay, so you want to write observations for what happened in the kettle and what happened in the beaker. You can maybe include a screenshot. And then there's a little background article where you want to basically explain how the article about fog connects to condensation. And then there are 3 reflection questions. All right, we are now on activity 5, investigation 5, which is about transpiration. So as you can see, we're going to observe how water can move through a plant. So first, an initial question that should just be background knowledge. How does water enter a plant? Why does the plant do this? So think about just like the parts or components of a plant. Which part does the plant use to take in water? Why does it do that? Okay, and then what you want to think about is what happens to water after it enters the plant. Only a few % of the water taken up through the roots is used for plants to live. Up to 99% of the water is lost. Complete the observations to see what happened. So in setting up the experiment, here's what I did. I watered the plants and I taped the bags onto the leaves or placed the plant in the bag, and I left the plant in the sun for a few hours. In fact, this year it's all just plants that are outside. So here is one of them. So I bagged this up this morning, about 6 hours ago. And so as you can see, this bag is full of condensation, but the bag did not have water in here when I bagged up the leaf. So the water must have come out of the leaves. And so what you want to do is record an observation of what do you see here inside the bag with the plant. Here's another totally different type of plant, and I bagged it up and you can see the same thing. The leaves look like this in this one, and despite looking quite different, they've still released a whole bunch of water into the bag. So for your observations, you want to write down like, what do you see in the bag? Well, you see water in the bag, water droplets that must have come out of the leaves. Here is a third type of plant, and as you can see, its leaves are different too. And yet, look at this bag. Oop, too close. Same thing. So it seems like no matter what type of plant it is, the leaves will release water. All right, so you just saw several plants who had lost water through their leaves. This is a process called transpiration. It's essentially just evaporation from a plant. All right, so you have 3 questions to answer, reflection questions to answer. There's a video. Use that video to talk about how plants move water through the UAE. Think about what type of energy is making the water evaporate from the leaves. Where does that energy come from? And then how does transpiration play a role in moving water through the UAE? And then you're going to finish this up with the final step, which is an evaluation and summary. So you want to think back to your purpose. You said at the beginning, did your investigation meet the purpose? Why or why not? And then do a summary. Write 2 to 3 sentences using specific components, processes, and interactions to explain why the water cycle is an example of a system. All right, and if you're curious, the rubric is right here. Please let me know if you have any questions.